you talk a bit about the origins of this record and this project?
Sure thing. So I guess what was it, the summer of 2020 and me and Mike did a kind of impromptu duo tour of Italy, and to this day it's one of the best tours we've ever done, really, because it was just the two of us, just in a hire car driving through coastal Italian towns, playing as a duo, and just really just playing initially compositions of our own, or some covers, and it was just such a glorious tour. We just kind of ate like kings and swam in the sea every day, and it was just the kind of template tour. And then we got back from that tour and just realized it was such a good time that we thought we should write some material for it, specifically for the project, and so that's what this is. It's the kind of the first time we've actually written for each other in this context. We've obviously, I mean, we've been friends for 2 decades, and we've been working together in all kinds of different sort of projects, but this is the first time we've kind of written for each other as specifically as a duo. And I think in doing the little tour together, I think we kind of discovered there was a lot of sort of opportunity in sort of exploring the kind of intimacy and the space of duo, and also the freedom that a duo kind of allows for. And so we've written collectively these I guess 10 tracks for this new album that I think, you know, in light of the current state of affairs in the world, I think almost, whether it was conscious or not, I'm not sure, but it felt like we were kind of trying to create a place for people to escape to. You know, the reoccurring theme with recording this was less is more, and lean was the kind of reoccurring word, taking things away rather than adding things, and just really trying to kind of get to the core of the sort of almost the vulnerability and the kind of exposure that a duo allows for, and in doing so, I think we've created a record that is definitely somewhere you can kind of escape to.
Yeah.
Mike, you wanna?
No, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Both of you have worked together, obviously, in various different kinds of formats, with Snarky Puppy, of course, being the biggest one. In this collaboration, in this specific one, did you maybe experience new things about the other one musically?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we normally work in large groups together, you know, so having the opportunity to just play as a duo, I think allows us to express ourselves in ways in which we don't really have space for in Snarky Puppy, you know. When you have 12 people on stage, you have to be very very conservative with your musical decisions, you know. But with 2 people, really, the kind of like the sky's the limit, you know. You can flow together in any direction you want and go as far in that direction as you want, and still kind of stay tethered to each other. So, you know, I think for both of us, maybe more so for me, because you know, Bill has a trio, and but I don't really, you know, and also I don't really solo a lot, you know. So in this group, it's really fun because not only can we go wherever we want, but also we have so many different opportunities to improvise, both as individuals and collectively as a duo, you know. And a lot of the time we start songs and we don't really talk about how we're going to start or how we're going to end, and we just kind of like see where things go, you know. And that's really wonderful about playing with just 2 people is just there are very few restrictions, you know, which I really enjoy after having worked with so many large groups throughout my life.
Yeah, I just add to that you know, I guess aesthetically, this duo, I mean, obviously I'm just playing piano, with felt through the whole record. But Mike is playing a selection of different instruments, including an oud and a fretless acoustic bass. I think stylistically, it's kind of seeing, well, certainly I'd never heard him play oud before. And so, and he's talked before about trying to kind of, respect the tradition of the instrument, whilst also trying to kind of push it forward, or just do his own thing on it. And I think for me, that's what's been interesting about this project, is how we've tried to create a sound that references a lot of almost kind of world traditions, for want of a better adjective, but still kind of in a contemporary context that is very much us, and just that sort of combination of referencing those kind of influences, but in our way. And that's been really fun to kind of explore that with Mike, in terms of trying to create a new sound together that is very much at us as individuals, but also kind of creating something new.
Yeah, I don't think we're trying to, especially in the context of the oud, but I think in general, I don't think this duo is really trying to do anything other than play songs that we write in the way that we want to play them. I think the oud has a very strong sound, obviously, as does the fretless acoustic bass, and it could be very easy to go into a space where you're kind of trying to replicate long-standing traditions, but we try to avoid that. For me, in this case, the oud is just an instrument that I play. It's not an attempt for me to play like a Turkish oud player or a Greek oud player or something. It's really just a vehicle for Bill and I to express songs through with a different tone. I'm very conscious of the tradition of that instrument in the world, how deep it is, and I'm also very conscious of the fact that I'm not that kind of oud player. You know what I mean? As much as I wish I were, I'm not. So it's really just we're just playing songs. I think that's the best way to think about it.
Bill, you just talked about creating a new sound. If both of you had to summarize what this record is about, like say a reduction or a space, as you've mentioned, or melody, how would you describe and summarize the record?
I think, instinctively when we were writing this, I will say, like, actually composing the music for this record was particularly challenging, in the sense that, we didn't have a rhythm section to hide behind, or horn section. And so the songs are kind of absolutely at their sort of purest. And when we were writing, we were saying, every compositional idea has to kind of have a very has to have purpose, and everything should kind of carry water by itself. And so in writing, it's like all the melodic ideas need to kind of stand by themselves, and the harmonic progressions. There was there was definitely a kind of reoccurring theme of simplicity, and just trying to kind of distill the pure composition, whatever that might be. And so in doing that, in having that as the kind of goalpost, I think it just kind of inherently created just a real sense of space. There's more space on this record than I think any other record we've ever done combined, maybe. Just in terms of, that's textural space, but also just in terms of the phrases as well. I feel like we were always just trying to kind of play simpler, and just try to get to the core of the composition. And so, as I say, I think in doing that, we've created a world that is spacious and has a kind of a freedom to it, and it's a place, I think, where we hope that the audience would want to go to escape somewhere. We try to kind of create another world in this kind of spacious sense. And yeah, I think, since doing this as well, I've gone on to kind of write more projects, and I found the thing I've taken forward is that sense of space, actually, and kind of sense of simplicity. Because previously the tendency would always be let's add layers, let's add things, and actually in going through this kind of recording process, it feels like the opposite is maybe a more powerful approach.
Can you talk a bit about the recording process itself?
Yeah. Well, it was during COVID, I mean, I guess during the first year of COVID. So we planned it and then we had to move it. And then when it finally happened and when we were finally able to get Bill over, he came here where I'm sitting right now to my studio, Studio Veen in Catalonia, to my home in northeastern Spain. I have a studio on the top floor of my house, and Nick Hard, who is our longtime collaborator and friend and engineer, came and recorded the two of us over maybe 3 or 4 days. Bill came a couple days early and we wrote some songs together, and then we just immediately recorded them. We had written some songs separately and sent them back and forth, but there was still some touching up that needed to be done. So there were a few days of us kind of working together and polishing compositions, and then a few days of us recording here in the house. It was very, very mellow. I mean, it was very, very chill. I tried to create a space here where people don't feel like they're in a recording studio,
Yeah, it really didn't feel like a recording session at all. We were taking like 3-hour lunch breaks,
Yeah.
Spanish time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. So it was, I think you also hear that in the music, that there wasn't really a whole lot of nervous energy, let's say. I mean, we were very relaxed and very focused, and it was very leisurely the way that we recorded it, even though we did it quickly. I think the record sounds like two people playing. That was the idea. That was the compositional concept, and that was the album concept. And we tried to not pollute that. We tried to only add things, textures and layers in situations in which we thought that compositionally that was kind of the concept, rather than doing it as a crutch.
So the environment in which you record, as you said, the studio environment, but also like the landscape, does it influence you a lot? I mean, in that case, you said it did because everything was very chill. But is it like for instance, the city in which you record or the landscape, does it influence you a lot during the recording process itself also?
I would definitely say so. I mean, before the sessions, I'd go for a run around the town, and I mean, the town, there's one shop and one bar and one chemist, and then within 5 minutes you're kind of in rich countryside, and so again, I think that sense of space was always kind of informing the writing and the creative process, certainly for me.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very small village where I live. It's 500 people, so it's a place where you really feel kind of away from the rest of the world. I think people's minds tend to be more at ease when they're in places like that. When you're away from kind of the frenetic energy of a city. So I feel like every record that gets made here has a different kind of sense of focus and a sense of kind of calm, compared to the energy that you experience when you record in New York or London, or Tokyo, or a place like that.
Michael, how did you choose this place you're just talking about in Catalonia? How come that you moved here and it became your center of work?
It's a village that I've been visiting since 2013. a good friend of mine who's one of the managers of the Metropole Orchestra. Her name is Friederike Darius. She's from Cologne, but she lives in Amsterdam. So Friederike is like a very, very close friend of mine, and bought a home here 20 years ago, and I visited her once, and just kind of fell in love with the village. So I just kept coming back and coming back and coming back, and then eventually I decided to leave the United States, and this was my number one option for escape during the Trump presidency. So I took advantage of it.
But it's, I imagine, quite a contrast to living in a big city in the United States.
It's the exact same as Brooklyn, actually.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I mean, yeah, it's very, very, very different. Yeah, very different. But I wanted that. I spent 11 years in Brooklyn. Bill has lived almost his whole life in London. I mean, I think, we both felt like really kind of in similar moments, actually. We both left the kind of downtown vibe for a more rural one. I mean, Bill still lives in the greater London area, but he's in a very, very mellow, peaceful, kind of suburb, and or not suburb, but neighborhood. And I moved into the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, I think we both had that feeling of like, it's time to turn a page and kind of start a new chapter,
It's true. And I think with us both also spending so much time on the road, I think there comes a point where I guess you can kind of, when you come home, you more and more, I've found you just want to be quiet, don't really want to go anywhere. And actually the quieter, the better, almost in contrast to, where you spend the rest of your life, on a tour bus or on an airplane or in a venue,
It's not very peaceful coming off a 6-month tour and then landing in New York City. Peaceful is not the word I would use to describe that.
Let's talk about the album title a bit. It's about creating a space where you wish you were. Like, it has a certain amount of escapism in it, I'd say, or even better, maybe you could describe the album title a bit, the meaning behind it.
So it was the name of one of the tracks that I brought to the table. I mean, the composing process was either there are tracks that we both had written, either tracks that they're either tracks that we've kind of written individually, or there's a few tracks where maybe one of us wrote the melody and then sent it to the other one and they wrote the chords and the bass line, or vice versa. And this track was really just a kind of I called it Where You Wish You Were, because it had this kind of yearning sort of quality about it, but it was literally just a melody with single bass notes. And then Mike heard it and had the idea of kind of creating this loop of the melody, just orchestrated differently each time. And so that was one of the tracks, Where You Wish You Were, on the record. And I guess, I don't know, I suppose instinctively it seemed to somehow represent this aspiration in the sound, I guess, of escapism. I think, as you allude to, there's this feeling of a place we've created that is to some degree comforting. I think, this was also, I mean, we basically recorded in the middle of lockdown, and there was a kind of sense of the world being in a state of flux, and there was a lot of uncertainty going on. And I think somehow, if I think about it now, instinctively we were trying to create somewhere that was almost in, some kind of comfort to that, and to how the world was feeling. And yeah, so that was just one of the tracks on the record.
Talking about reduction, Bill, you are known to play a whole range of, you, of course, you're both known to play a whole range of instruments, but in your case, Bill, you really limited yourself to the acoustic piano on that record. Was it like clear from the very beginning that you just play that?
Yeah, I think it was. You know, I mean, there might have been a very early conversation about, oh, we could put a synth on this, or we could try Rhodes on that. But I think as the material began to take shape, it quickly became clear that you know, less is more, and it's really just kind of focusing in on the duo, which I think, you know, for me, I mean, in the context of a duo, I'm definitely most at home at the piano, and I mean, with the piano itself, we ended up putting felt on the piano, and we tried lifting the felt off for a track or two, and quickly decided to put the felt back on. And you know, I absolutely love the sound of piano with felt, because it kind of it takes away the attack and allows you to kind of almost play more percussively without it becoming fatiguing. And the sound of that piano, I mean, that's the piano in Mike's studio, and it's an upright. Is it a Czech make, Mike? It's Petrov.
Yeah, it's Petrov. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful instrument. But again, just trying, like, I think, you know, we were just looking for that sound that kind of draws you in, and isn't so sort of aggressive, I guess, a kind of softer tone. And I suppose that kind of allowed for, you know, with that being a sort of foundation in the record, there was room for other sounds to accompany that, that Mike was playing. But I definitely felt instinctively like I was just, I mean, I'm always happiest at the piano, you know, that's my home. So you know, I was happy to just be playing piano with felt.
I think when you limit yourself in general in music, it opens up actually a lot of possibilities. You know, kind of that paradox of like the handcuffs being your liberation. You know what I mean? I think that when you really know, like, I'm just playing oud with no pedals, because that was another thing we were thinking about, is live I play an electric oud with effects, but in the studio we decided, let's just do really an acoustic piano and an acoustic oud, and let's have all the interest come from either the composition or the musical decisions that we make, rather than from the sounds, you know. So that made us play very differently, you know, rather than if we had played knowing that we were going to overdub lots of things. And also, I think the felt on the piano, it kind of reminds me of like kind of like feet on snow. You know, there's like a snowy feeling to felt, and we wrote the majority of this music in the winter, and when we recorded it, we agreed that it's very much like a winter album. You know, it feels that way. So I think that there were a lot of things contributing to the overall sound, and I think instrumental limitations, compositional limitations, and some very simple tonal decisions that we made, kind of have culminated in this this kind of dreamy, otherworldly sound. You know, that at least that's what we're going for.
Michael, you have already talked about the oud, about your own approach on the oud. Can you talk a bit about how you discovered the oud for yourself, and how you developed your own way of playing, and what fascinated you about this instrument?
Well, I first played an oud when I was maybe 15. My brother plays oud also, and so there was one in the house. And my brother plays a lot of different instruments, and of all the instruments that he had laying around, this was the one that interested me the most, I think, because it was this really interesting combination of bass and guitar and also percussion, you know, because it's a very, very, very percussive instrument. But then I never really did anything other than mess around with it as a kid every once in a while, and then I spent decades without touching one. And years later, I went to Turkey to study percussion, erbane, which is a daf, which is a Kurdish frame drum. And while I was there, I thought, like, well, I'm in Turkey. I mean, if I'm ever going to play oud, this is the place to get one, you know. So I bought one, and and started messing around with it. And I guess that was in 2017 or 18. I can't remember. And I just got really into it. I would bring it on tour and practice. I never really had a teacher. I have like an oud mentor named Ada Dinkjian, who's an incredible Armenian American oud player, from a group called the Secret Trio also. And he's been really funny with me, like with the oud, because I'm always asking him for advice on like how to get to the roots of the instrument and what to learn that's traditional and stuff. And he always just tells me like, don't learn anything traditional. He's like, you already play very differently than most oud players, and we don't need more great traditional oud players. You should just like be weird and be different and develop your voice on the oud. And I mean, I take that advice to a certain extent, but also it's my nature to want to like learn the tradition, but I haven't really spent the amount of time necessary to do it. So at a certain point, I think I'm going to go to Turkey and Greece and study for real, like just playing really only old school stuff. But for now, it's fun treating it kind of like a weird toy,
And what about the Ngoni? I hope I pronounce it right.
Yeah, Ngoni, yeah.
Ngoni.
I mean, what do I know about how to pronounce Ngoni? But yeah, I have a lot of instruments from around the world laying around the house that I can play at 2% of a normal person's capacity, and Ngoni was one of them. And I think sometimes it's very inspiring to pick up an instrument that you don't have mastery of and compose on it, because I think you inherently come up with ideas that a person who plays that instrument would never come up with. Your relationship with the instrument is very different, and it's also a safe space because you're not actually like playing something that's been played before. You're actually inventing something. So who's to say that you're doing it wrong when it's your thing that you created, So that's one of the one of the most beautiful things about composition, I think, is that when you create something compositionally, there's really no one that can tell you that you didn't do it right. It's really yours. And if you're using an instrument that you don't normally play as the vehicle, sometimes that can actually be very, very interesting for people who play that instrument, because they would never come up with that idea after years and years of knowledge of the instrument. So sometimes I use it as a compositional tool. I know Bill does the same with a lot of instruments that he has that aren't keyboards laying around the house. So yeah, I mean, I think also if you're a musician and you understand how to get a nice sound and play with a nice feel and play with emotion, I think actually you don't need a whole lot of technique to be able to play something that speaks to people, at least on record. It's not like you have to be able to play giant steps on any given instrument for you to be considered, for you to be able to make music on it. I mean, yeah. Thank God, because I can't even do that on my primary instrument.
When was the last, when speaking about like, let's say instruments or also world music, when was the last time both of you were traveling and you discovered something that really blew your mind, either an instrument or like maybe a genre of music that you hadn't come across in depth, maybe?
Well, there's an example that springs to mind straight away. When we were in Colombia, and we were on tour with Snarky, and after the gig, we were invited to this show featuring this group called La Perla. Is that what they're called, Mike?
Yes, sir. It means the pearl.
Oh. And it was 4 female singers and percussionists who were just playing the most incredible music. And I remember the whole band went down, and just a cappella singing with really powerful and kind of aggressive drumming, and it was just mesmerizing. I don't think any of I remember just kind of, we were stood at the side of the stage. I looked to my left and the entire band and just kind of staring at the stage like just completely transfixed. But just kind of that sort of passion and that just to see four girls like that just really play so sort of aggressively, I guess, was quite I'd never seen anything like that before, and it was absolutely wonderful. And they've played at Ground Up Festival, right?
Yeah. They tour all over the world. Incredible group, playing just gaita, which is this long Colombian flute, and like the kind of like a maracon, which is like a giant maraca, and then also some tambores, like hand drums. So it's all just percussion and voice, which is really, really beautiful. That's a combination that constantly you hear around the world. Actually, in 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to Cuba for a few weeks to produce a record with for 2 different bands, 2 different Cuban rumba bands that are traditionally rivals, actually. Los Muñequitos de Matanzas and Afro Cuba de Matanzas, in the same little town, Matanzas in Cuba. And it's just, rumba is just voice and percussion. I mean, it's a very, very lean, as Bill, has been saying. Like, it's a very, very lean instrumentation, and I think that it actually creates a very rich palette of possibilities, because you're getting the sense of harmony from the actual drums. You're hearing the tones of the drums in a way that you don't hear them when you slam a Fender Rhodes or an electric guitar on top of them. I think it's really a really beautiful way to make music.
As 2 musicians who tour a lot and who are very active, when you're not on tour, or maybe when you're not on job duty, producing some other band, is traveling also a big part of your life in your off days, so to say?
I definitely. I mean, I would say, a huge part of the reason I became interested in music was because it allowed you to travel. And I remember we met a few years ago. We're lucky to meet John McLaughlin, and I remember asking him, the guitarist John McLaughlin, and I remember asking him, what's your favorite thing about being a musician? And he said, it's the fact that even if I travel halfway across the world, because of music, I can be somebody's brother or sister. And it's like, music is the one thing that kind of allows you to be part of that sort of international family. It's the language that the one universal language, so to speak. And I think what we've been super lucky with Snarky Puppy and with our solo projects of going to these places and musicians kind of opening the door to the music of that place. And so when we play a show, we'd finish the gig and the musicians would go and would invite us to a gig, and that's exactly what happened in Colombia, and and that happens time and time again. So we kind of get to see the music of the place, and I guess that kind of reaffirms, I don't know, certainly how lucky I feel to be a musician, and I have a little 3-year-old, and I'm going to do everything in my power to try and make sure that he's a musician too. without putting the pressure on. I'm just going to keep the door open. But I mean, I'm biased, but in being a musician and having kind of been fortunate enough to travel as much as I have, but it's through music that I've really been able to kind of see get under the skin of a place, and really kind of understand like the rhythm and the harmony that makes the place tick. And I think that's, it's like the music and the food, really, I feel like and the language are the sort of 3 things. And so I mean, that said, obviously, because we travel so much for work, like we sort of said before, the tendency is to want to stay in one place when you're not working. But I feel like to be a musician is to be interested in culture, right? And traveling is 100% part of that.
Yeah, I think we both have a lot of Wanderlust. Wanderlust is the word, right? It's German, isn't it? Wanderlust? No.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we both have a lot of wanderlust. You know, Bill and I think we're like the typical musicians that every time we go to a cool, interesting place, we both go, you know what? We should just move here, you know? I mean, Bill and I have been saying that to each other about dozens of cities and countries for 20 years. You know, I think what it really comes down to is just curiosity. I think that we're both very curious people, um and I think we're both very empathetic people. I think we want to learn about and understand the way of life in different parts of the world, and I think that goes into your music too. When you play, you know, you don't just think like, oh no, I don't play anything other than jazz, or I only play indie rock or what. You know, I mean, I think when you say, oh wow, that's a really interesting idea from another part of the world, like how can I incorporate that? How can I learn more about that to incorporate it in a better way? You know, it creates a lot of musical possibilities.
Both of you are working on, or both of you have a very big output. You're working on different kinds of music. What I was wondering is your working process, do you work on more things at the same time, or do you prefer to do one project and then the next project and then the next project?
I guess for me, I like to do one at a time generally, so I can kind of give it all my attention. But I would say that I try to make a point of those different things being different every time. I've found that the key to kind of staying inspired is in changing the goalposts. So each time, you know, just giving yourself a different context within which to create. And I find that difference can inform the next difference, or, you know, it's like every time you try a new approach, that's going to inform the next new approach. And almost, you know, I've found as time's gone on, I've actually tried to kind of jump even further in different directions, you know, but also kind of setting parameters so that it almost, I think by setting a parameter, a creative parameter, it provides a creative opportunity. And so, you know, like the most recent thing I'm working on right now is a thing with a string orchestra, the Untold Orchestra from Manchester, and I made the conscious decision to not write for rhythm section. So it's just an album for strings and piano with synthesizers. I had to get synthesizers. I couldn't keep the synthesizers out. But as a result, all the rhythm has to come from the strings and the piano, right? And so straight away, I had a new context within which to write, and so it's very kind of influenced by Steve Reich and Philip Glass, lots of repetitive rhythm from the orchestra, and then leaving room for the piano. And so just by kind of making the decision to leave out the rhythm section, that creates a whole new sort of creative opportunity. So, you know, just having different goalposts each time, for me is I think how to stay inspired.
Yeah, I mean, I really wish that we could both just work on one project at a time. I think that that's definitely how Bill and I prefer to work, because we're both slightly obsessive people. You know, it kind of takes us a minute to get into what we're doing, and then once we get into it, we just go like all the way down the hole. But the reality of being a musician today is that it's just not possible. I mean, right now I'm recording a Kurdish singer at my house all week, and now I'm doing an interview talking about a record that I made with Bill, you know? So it's not really possible. I think you have to be very, very, very rich and famous to really only do one thing at a time, you know? It's just the nature of the beast of being a musician, that you're going to have to multitask in certain moments, and just kind of controlling that the best you can to put yourself in a position where you're still actually doing things in a creative and efficient way, is one of our big challenges, you know. But I've definitely consciously over the years, like every year, tried to really schedule dedicated time day after day after day for a certain project until I'm sure it'll be done, and then do the same with the next project, rather than be producing 4 records at once. It's like very hard for me to split my simple brain into that. Like I just can't do it. You know, I'm like very one track mind, you know. I think a lot of creative people are. I think it's very difficult for us to go deep into a creative space and then just leave that space and go deeply into another creative space, like on command.
Although interesting with this record as well, I remember us talking about, you know, just kind of setting an allotted time, right? Which I think is definitely something I've suffered from before, of having a kind of no specific deadline per se, and then the project just carries on, and you know, I think as we've gone forward, it's like, you know, just try to write it, record it, and be out, and you know, I guess trying to be more prolific and just trying to kind of generate content and obviously, you know, don't it can only be finished if it's actually, you know, decent. But like, you have to, you know, there can be a tendency to want to go back, and you know, there's no limit to how many times you can kind of re-edit or retake. And so I think there's also a sense of just trying to commit to the idea, capture the idea, and move on.
You said, so Bill, you said in the quote about the record that everything has its very specific purpose.
Yeah, I guess like compositionally, you know, the compositional content, every single compositional idea is playing a specific role, and nothing is kind of being put in without it really sort of carrying some weight somehow. And again, just sort of trying to be very specific in the compositional choices. But also, I think in the takes themselves, we kind of, I mean, there were certain takes that I think we got, you know, first take. And in light of that thing of just trying to capture the duo in its sort of raw, pure form, you know, that actually seemed to be right. And, you know, so with, I don't know, little creaks in the chair and, you know, whatever it was, just little other things that maybe on previous, you know, other records we'd be more precious about. It was kind of, we just wanted to capture it in its purest form. Yeah.
We've already talked about the felt piano, we've talked about the oud, we've talked about the ngoni. Michael, you're using a range of other instruments as well. A lot of them are fretless, a fretless guitar, I think. Can you talk a bit about what else you've used on this record? It would be very interesting.
Yeah, you might know better than me. I don't really. I think that I think aside from the oud and the ngoni, I played a fretless acoustic guitar bass. And that was also made in Turkey, and a fretless baritone electric guitar, which was made by the same guy that made the bass, Serdalda, from Istanbul. What I like about these instruments is that they don't really sound like anything that you've heard before. You know, like it's not like playing an acoustic guitar where just you recognize the sound of an acoustic guitar immediately. They're kind of these two instruments specifically, the fretless baritone electric guitar and the fretless acoustic guitar bass, are very ambiguous kind of sounding instruments. You don't really know if it's an upright bass or if it's an acoustic guitar bass, or, you know. And then with the fretless baritone electric, it's very strange. I mean, it's a very strange sound to hear, like a fretless guitar, you know. It's more common in Turkey, but it's still not really a super common instrument. And I like dealing with instruments like this because there's less of an established tradition versus the oud, which is like a very, very long, rich, established tradition. With these other instruments, it's kind of like, it's a little more like the Wild West, you know. You can kind of treat them however you want, and there's no purist that can shoot you down for it, which I really enjoy, that kind of freedom. Also, I think inherently an instrument without frets tends to be a lot more expressive than an instrument with frets. You know, you have a lot more room to play with the pitch and play with embellishments and ornaments, and to really be more like a singer. So I really try to treat these instruments, you know, I mean, none of the instruments that I played on this record have frets. The ngoni, the oud, the fretless bass, and the fretless baritone electric guitar, so you know, you can really have a lot of fun with the way in which you express yourself. And that's kind of stabilized by the piano, which of course is tempered. So it's a very interesting combination, I think, of playing a tempered instrument next to instruments that have no frets and really no limitations in terms of where you choose to place notes pitch wise. But overall, I just feel more expressive on fretless instruments. My first bass was a fretless bass when I was a kid, and I've always loved that freedom.
Mike is a killing upright player too. Not many people know that, but he's amazing.
I didn't play actually any double bass on this record, because I think the reason why I stayed away from it is because I just think it's a sound that's heard so often, you know, and I'm a big fan of the idea that when you change the process, you change the product, you know, and so it's like if we choose these instruments that are a little less conventional, then inherently the final result will turn out very differently. These instruments will open doors to new rooms, you know. So that's what I was going for on my end, you know. And I know Bill was going for with the felt, you know, just trying to see how these little subtle differences will affect the way that we make music.
I think that point about the fretlessness of all the instruments that you played is really significant, actually, in the context of, you know, this getting to the core of the composition and allowing for that space of expression. Because I think, were you playing a fretted guitar, you know, I think part of the reason we can kind of get away with this duo sound is down to the fretlessness. I think in terms of the kind of, it's like a, you know, when you have an accompanist and a singer, it's like the singer has to have that sort of expression, and I think the fretlessness definitely kind of allows for that dynamic of the duo to kind of sit, you know, to have that kind of equilibrium about it.
Yeah, and I also think that aside from the pitch thing, you know, not playing tempered instruments, I think that all these instruments are kind of like that I'm playing are kind of in between instruments. You know, like a baritone electric guitar is exactly between a bass and a guitar, right? Well, not almost exactly, right? It's tuned from B to B versus a guitar, which is E to E, or a bass, which is E an octave down to G, you know? So the baritone guitar lives in between a guitar and a bass. The oud lives in between a guitar and a bass. The fretless acoustic bass is tuned like a regular bass, but the sound is really like an acoustic guitar. You know? And then the Ngoni is kind of off on its own thing. It's, you know, but I tend to be fascinated by instruments that are kind of in between instruments, you know, versus the like very conventional sounds that we know and love and listen to every day. I just think it's you know, you change the instrument and you change the way that you play. I think that that's very inspiring for both of us.
What's next for you guys? Very pragmatic question. What any new projects?
So I've already talked about this orchestral project that we recorded in September of this year, and so I'm currently editing and mixing that now, which is for 18 string players and piano and synthesizers, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's that's coming together, and then I mean I'm touring with my trio later in the year, but before that, me and Mike have got a few duo shows, hopefully in February and March, I think. But then there's also Ground Up Festival, which Snarky Puppy will be playing at in Miami on the second week of Feb. But yeah, I guess as we've said, you know, there's lots of different projects that we both do, and as we've said, the variety is what keeps them interesting. And so it's nice. I've got a few solo piano shows coming as well, and then I'm going with my trio for the first time to Brazil actually, which should be fun in kind of May time, and then I'm playing with a Vienna big band in May as well. Or I think that's June, and then there's Snarky Puppy, a kind of on and off tour throughout 2023 all the way through. So there's that going on too.
Yeah, next year's a big year for Snarky Puppy since we just released our 14th album, Empire Central. So we're touring it basically everywhere that we've ever played before. But in between that, Bill and I are going to be playing to kind of let the world know that this record is out. And also I have another band called Bocante that's releasing our third album in early summer of next year. And mostly I work as a producer these days. So it's an excuse for me to actually wake up in my own bed, having people come to my house to record. So I've got some really interesting artists coming to my house in the next year. And I'm also going to a couple different places like Cuba in January to produce records for different people. So that's really kind of the thing. I mean, I think for musicians, it's funny. It's like every day is unique. Like there's never a routine, but also kind of every day is Groundhog Day in a certain way because, like our lives don't really change that much. Like every day you wake up and you probably get on some method of transportation to go and engage with music in some way for some people, it's not like my friends who are like engineers or like that I grew up with, like their lives when they were 22 are nothing like their lives when they're 45, but for us, it's kind of just like the same. I think that's why musicians are like kind of permanently in a state of childhood, for lack of a better term, because we never really have to grow up. We just kind of like every day it's like wake up, get on a bus, get on a train, get on a plane, check into a hotel, leave the hotel, go to sound check, play a gig, eat some really interesting food, meet some cool people, go to bed, do it again,
Yeah, well then, I have to thank you so much for taking the time. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. I'm really a big fan of both of you and of your band and of Snarky Puppy, obviously. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Markus.
Thank you and have a good one.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Goodbye.
Later, y'all.